Welcome to Season 3 of the DTV Podcast, presented by the Bless Your Heart Nonprofit Corporation. I'm Brendan Mathern, and I'll be your host as we speak to some of the most interesting people on Bayou Lafourche. We're so excited to be back for our third season, and we welcome all of our new subscribers and encourage you to check out our previous episodes. We've interviewed so many people, from public officials to local business owners. We've covered a variety of social issues, which has made for some very interesting episodes. And we've talked a lot about hurricanes, especially Hurricane Ida. And we've spoken to some familiar faces who have been around for a while, and some new up-and-comers who you're sure to see in the spotlight for years to come. That segue brings us to our first episode of Season 3, where we'll discuss the history and the future of the South Lafourche Levee District, which oversees maintenance of the levee that has protected South Lafourche for many years. Joining us today is the former general manager and 42-year veteran of the South Lafourche Levee District, Wendell Curall, and the new general manager, Nicholas Mathern. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be here.
Well, guys, we're going to start with how we start every episode. We're going to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and about your family. So we always ask the question, who's your mom and dad? So tell us about your family, where you grew up, and a little bit about your professional career.
Well, I guess I'll start. I'm Nick Mathern, grew up here in South Lafourche, graduate of Holy Rosary, and then went on to LCO and graduated South Lafourche in 2001. My dad is Wade Mathern, originally from Des Allemands. He worked for South Central Bell, then Bell South, AT&T ultimately, where he retired. Got bored in retirement, was working a little harder at home than he was at work, so he decided to get another job, worked for IT at the school board for 10 more years, just retired again. My mom is Elaine Mathern. She was a Danos from Delta Farm. And I have a younger sister, Brittany, who is a para at Lafourche Parish School Board. And I have a brother I don't really talk about in public if I can help it.
Don't blame you.
He works for the sheriff's office, hosts a podcasts. But, so I am Brennan's brother, for those of y'all who don't know. My wife is Sarah Mathern. She was a Thibodeau, graduated from Central Lafourche in 2003, so that makes things a lot of fun at home with the Central versus South debates. But she holds down the fort at St. Hilary Catholic Church, where we attend in Raceland, and we have 5 boys. Owen would have been 14. He passed away. It's going on 8 years now. Then we've got Eli is 13, Jack is 10, Cole is 7, and Luke is 3. So that's our crew. It's loud. The house is never clean, but it's a lot of fun.
My name is Wendell Curall, and I was raised in Cutoff, Louisiana. My mother was from Golden Meadow, Beatrice Crosby Curall. And my dad was born in Cutoff, and he was a roughneck and a shrimper and a tugboat captain, and worked for the last few years of his life. He worked for Crosby Tugs, who was his brother-in-law. So had my brothers and sisters. My brother is Kendall Curall, who kicked the point that won the state championship in 1977 against Bonneville. That miraculous night when a double-tip pass is caught in the end zone with a minute left. My brother kicks the football. The tackle comes in and blocks it, and it flutters over the goal line. And then on the kickoff, I think it was, tackled the guy from Bonneville, and they both out. He's knocked out, and the Bonneville guy's got a broken leg. And the last play of the game, Tommy Wilcox, who was going to play for Alabama, gets tackled by Bebe Ogeron to win the state championship. Is that unbelievable? Awesome. And then I had my sisters, Sheila, Lisa, and Deidre Curall. And so I have 2 kids, Rain Pierre Curall and Alex Curall. And my wife is Julie Pellegrini Curall from the North Shore. And it's been great, and it's great to see kids. And I've got a grandchild, so that's real good, Bubby Curall. And I've got my degree in biology, went to South Lafourche, of course, degree in biology at Nichols, worked as a Sea Grant agent, working with the fishing industry. And then soon after that, I worked for about 5 years there, and then got a chance to come back home, and I was offered the job in the Levee District when basically we had 12 miles of levee, one little pump station, and I think 3 employees. But talking about the beginning of the system, Dick Guidry really had the idea. Dick Guidry was the youngest legislator ever elected into the Louisiana legislature. And he knew, we had some flood problems on the way. He passed a concurrent resolution signed by the governor that has a call to look at a study of our area to see if they had some federal interest in protecting the area. So they did the Grand Isle and vicinity study. And in that study, they said, look, enough value to go ahead and build some type of system was between LaRose and Golden Meadow. And so that was the beginning of that project. And then once the project began, the name was changed from the Grand Island vicinity to the LaRose to Golden Meadow Hurricane Protection System. The design memorandum was completed in 1955, and then the project was authorized in 1965. Actually, October 27, 1965, after Hurricane Betsy, which hit September 9th, 1965, on my 14th birthday. And we were very lucky that, the eye went right over us, and had it gone a little bit more to the west, we would have had some serious flooding because we had little drainage levees at that time. But Betsy did a lot of changes in government. After Betsy, that's when the Corps got involved in building hurricane levees. Our system was authorized in October 27th, along with the New Orleans and vicinity. And so the same system that protects New Orleans was authorized in the same one, along with the Carnarvon and Davis Pond projects, all authorized in that Word of Bill from 1965. And Hurricane Betsy also was the reason flood insurance, national flood insurance, federal flood insurance started, because people lost so much money. The regular insurers, they stopped writing flood insurance. So the federal government started the National Flood Insurance Program. At the beginning was hard on everybody, the public, us. We flooded for Juan when we weren't quite finished with the system, but we kept going back to the people. And when Gingrich and Clinton were fighting, the federal money stopped. So we asked the people to go from a 4.86 millage tax to put 5 more mills on, so we could continue building the levee, and they approved that at 73%. And then after Katrina, we were supposed to be in the 4th supplemental congressional allocation for Louisiana, and we were left out. Us and Plaquemine were left out. So we went back to the people and asked for 1 penny sales tax and 82% approval of that. And luckily, those things were done because that's the only dependable money. The state has helped us a lot year by year, but not as consistently as we like. And the feds have been helpful, but the daily tax burden that our people spend, we work hard to make them get some return on their investment with those taxes.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's such an important part of this is for people listening from outside the area, that rely on Army Corps or whoever is going to be building their levee to protect them. Is that option is certainly there, but the Cajun ingenuity and the people of South Lafourche saw this coming a long time before that ever happened and started that process, and they've expanded upon it. Like you said, first the millage, then the sales tax, and to pass any sales tax by an 82%, regardless of voter turnout, is just phenomenal. But the fact that the people here understood the value of the levee and of building the levee and making it more of an issue for a hurricane to overtop it is so significant, and that passage may be one of the most significant taxes to ever pass in Lafourche.
Well, as those of us in South Lafourche, we would not be here as a normal community if they had not passed those taxes. We needed every dollar that the feds have provided, and they provided the first, basically, foundation of the system. And the state helps us; they do a tremendous help. In fact, we helped get the offshore oil revenue. The South Lafourche Levee District begged Governor Blanco to sue for it, and she did, and it led to some legislation that now we get 37.5% of deep offshore oil, supported by the port that these people paid the taxes for, Port Fourchon. So we pay taxes, but that's what people in South Lafourche, if they see a goal and it makes sense, they don't mind taxing themselves to get the benefits. And And we've tried to honor every dollar. And we have a sales tax, and people that aren't poor pay that are not well off, they pay that sales tax, that penny for every dollar when they buy their bread and their milk. And I talked to my employees about that. I said, look, these people don't have a lot, and the poor suffer the most when there's a flood. So when we spend their money well to protect them and get that double benefit, but it's about trying to, we look at it as we want to give them what they paid for. And we work real hard at it, and we keep talking about that. I talked to my guys just the other day and said, look, what kind of job, how proud can you be that you're doing a job that's protecting your family, your friends, your community, to be able to have that opportunity to do that and get paid for it. You got to look at it. And for Ida, look, my guys were out there, their houses, their roofs were taken off, rain falling in their house, and yet they're out there 24/7 as we needed it. We were at the hospital, the roof gets pulled off. In New Orleans, they got $1 million places for them to, safe houses. And we've put every dollar we can into the levee itself. So we go to the hospital because it's the biggest building, and then the roof gets pulled off. But my guys went out in the dark. We tried to get out as early as we could and tried 3 times, and the wind was so strong we couldn't walk to the vehicles. And then we got word that the fire department had gotten out. Well, I figured if they can make it to their vehicles, we could. And then we started checking out the pump stations and the floodgates. A couple of my guys, man, they wouldn't take no for an answer. I was with another one of my employees, and we had a trail across the road to the Basin pump station. And we just couldn't get there, but we called the guy who had some equipment in the neighborhood. And a few hours later, he had taken it up. But another pair of our guys were cutting, telephone poles and trees to get to the pump stations, and they accomplished that. So really proud about them doing that. I mean, just opening the door, you had to use one arm and both legs to just get the door open. The wind was blowing so hard. But they did a great job. Now, I got to talk about the fire department. They were out there, their fire department's leaking, rain all over the place. They're getting these calls, and they got out there, commandeered a bus, a backhoe, and they cleared the road so we could go to some places. And they picked up, I think, some 51 people in the middle of the storm. So can't say enough about what those guys did. Again, their houses ruined, but yet they were out there taking care of people and kept doing it, and our people kept doing it. I was really proud about what we accomplished.
So, yeah, we were talking about, even before we started recording, about how everyone has, in our first season, everyone had a Hurricane Betsy story. And after 2021, everyone's going to have an Ida story. So it's not surprising that we hear an Ida story from the Levee District, not before long in our episode with you guys. So for our listeners who are not from this area, but have a general knowledge of where Bayou Lafourche is and generally where La Rose, Golden Meadow is, can you explain the location of the levee system, where it starts in La Rose, heads down on the west side, and then up on the east side?
Well, our district itself starts on the southern coast, the southern bank line of the Intercoastal Canal, and goes from Terrebonne Parish line to the Jefferson Parish line, and goes to 3 miles in the Gulf is a district. That's a taxing district. But because the Corps has helped us pay for the La Rosa Golden Meadow project, and 95% of the people live inside the communities of La Rose, Cutoff, Galion, and Golden Meadow, we put almost 100% of our money into that. And I say almost because we do realize we have taxpayers outside that don't live in the system. So we get involved with things like the elevated highway. And why does that make any sense? Because the people live outside. It helps get them inside of the system where they can get the first level of protection. Protection is 20 miles closer than if we didn't exist at all. And then the road in Golden Meadow. We're building this 21-foot elevated road coming from Fauchon into the system down on 3235. They're going to be on that road at 3235 is 2.4 feet below sea level near the park in Golden Meadow. So that only works and only makes sense if you have the levee system. And so all these things kind of tie together. And Fauchon would not be Fauchon if you couldn't drive to it. And with the LA1 in Golden Meadow is 0.4 feet above sea level. We maintain the water level in the bayou low enough that Golden Meadow's not underwater half of the time. So we have the La Rose floodgate and the Golden Meadow lock. We have to manipulate to keep the water low enough in the bayou so that people can have a dry land existence.
So explain that too, because that's something that has changed in the last few years. We no longer have a LaRose floodgate and a Golden Meadow floodgate. We now have the lock system. So explain that system for people, maybe even from here, that don't quite recognize what we do now.
Well, the system was designed, and these gates were designed only to close when there was a hurricane. But because of subsidence of the whole platform of South Louisiana, which was built by all this sediment and gravity keeps pulling on it, no more floods, no more new soil to raise the land, so the land keeps going down. And so we've had to go ahead and start closing the floodgates outside of hurricanes just to keep water off of the streets inside of the system. And then it got so bad, Fouchon, they need fuel or drilling mud every 4 days. They need to get supplied with it. We were closing the gate. The water stayed that high, that long, that we had to keep it closed sometimes more than 4 days. So it was a real big problem. And Reggie Dupree, he said, look, you need to have that project. I said, absolutely. But it's very frustrating. We don't see any movement on it. And he came through, said us to keep on working at it. And we ended up getting a few $1 million from the state. And that's how critical it was. Lulin Pete had to sell a vote to help the governor get a bill passed. And he did it for one reason, so the people of South Lafourche could have an economy and be able to keep the water off of the streets in Golden Meadow and on the other side of Ponce Saucisse,
That's interesting. And look, a lot of people don't even recognize it if you don't pass by it every day, you don't work in Fouchon or you don't recognize the advancements that's been. But if you haven't seen the Golden Meadow floodgate, so to speak, in many years, it's certainly something interesting. And we saw history made for Hurricane Ida as we closed the wall that blocks off LA1.
Yeah, the gate, that was the first use of it. The ramp itself is 12 feet, and we don't like gates because when you close the gate, you stop people from going through. We wanted to build a ramp, but the engineers say that the load of dirt to get it up to 16 or 17 would be so heavy it might displace some of the wall that goes to the floodgate and the lock and the Leon Terrio lock. And I mentioned Leon because he's the one who hired me back in 1980, way back then. And I want to say something about our board members. Starting way back then, and the 9-member board appointed by our elected officials, and you have to thank those people for appointing the people on that board, because our elected officials have appointed people that understood there's only one focus that needs to be there. It's keep water out of people's homes and businesses. Everything we do is focused to that. And what I've learned in looking around other people work in other situations, you can only be as good as your boss lets you be. If your boss has the right purpose, the right reason to do things. And we've been so fortunate that it's been laser sharp that keep water out of homes and businesses, stretch every dollar, build as high as you can build and as strong as you can build, because we don't control it. We can build the best levee in the world, and if God says, I'm going to put the water 3 feet higher, we're going to flood. And so that's the other part. We have a good system. We're better today than yesterday. We'll be better tomorrow than today. But we can never promise people that we won't flood. So go to natural high ground. Let the levee protect your property.
I think we've talked about just in the history and talking about, how the people tax themselves for this. I think it's obvious, if you haven't figured it out, that this levee is as critical literally as anything else in South Lafourche. Because without it, South Lafourche doesn't exist, like you said, at least not as it is today.
Well, I tell you, look at Leeville. Okay, Golden Meadow and Galliano would be like Leeville if we didn't have the levee. And Leeville would be like Golden Meadow and Galliano if it did have the levee.
Right.
That's how much contrast there is in our ability to live here and not live here.
And anyone that has not been to Leeville since Hurricane Ida, you wouldn't recognize it, even from right before Ida. But certainly if you haven't been to Leeville in like 10 years, you would not. It's just nothing is there compared to what we had 5-10 years ago. But with all that said, the levee system has been tested over the years, and Ida was just the most recent test. I remember back in 2005, you sharing images with me from the helicopter of Hurricane Rita. Now, this is a storm that didn't even hit us. This storm went to Texas, and yet the water was, it seemed, inches from coming over in some areas.
We had the debris line was on top of the levee.
Well, there you go, yeah.
Now, wasn't enough to pond, but the debris line was at the top. I mean, think about 2005. You have Katrina, worst surge on history, 28 feet. Waveland, Mississippi is 23 feet high. Waveland, where the railroad tracks are, right? Our levees are just 18. Waveland, the railroad track is 23 feet, and yet the 28-foot surge from Katrina went all the way to the interstate highway. That's why, and Katrina, we were just talking about that today. We were showing the tracks. There was a time that Katrina and Ida were along the same track, and we were just extremely fortunate that right when it passed south of the mouth of the river, Katrina went due north. That's what saved us. And we could have had that 20 feet of water and our community destroyed, and I don't know if we would ever come back. And Ida, some friends of mine said, look, Wendell, you spent your whole career on this. Don't you want to see if it would work good for a big storm? And I said, no, I never want to find out. And here comes Ida. I mean, that's a storm we should not have been able to handle, and we did. So we work hard, but we don't control that luck. Okay, we don't control that. Yeah, the water would have been 3 feet higher. People say, oh man, it's so great, y'all did good. Well, we would have worked no less if that surge would have been 4 feet higher and the area would have flooded. We wouldn't have done anything different. We worked as hard as we could work. We stretched every dollar as far as we could do it. And that's all you can do. Do the best you can, and then you can sleep good at night. Because I think about that. I go to bed at night, and I think, how can we make it better? Because if it does happen, if people die, I got to know that I did everything I could.
All right. Yeah, we talk about that in our industry, in law enforcement, or as a PIO all the time. You train for the 5% of the time. You train for that crisis situation, but 95% of what you do is not crisis. And that could be said as well for you guys, just maintaining that levee and the day-to-day operations. You're not dealing with a hurricane every day.
But here's the
But
thing.
you hope you never have to use that training.
The only time that we don't work at improving the levee is when there's a hurricane. We can't work on it. No, I'm serious. I mean, we really look at it all the time, 24/7. We're looking at the water levels. We're looking at what we need to do to keep water away from where people don't want it.
All right, so now that he's outlined this enormous responsibility, Nick, what led you to take on this position? What do you see as the future focus of the Levee District moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you, during Ida, or before Ida, Wendell and I had already been talking about the possibility of me taking over for him when he, or if he ever retired. And so we rode out Ida at our house. And had some friends of ours from Lafayette that messaged us the day before Ida hit, the Saturday really, to say, look, if y'all need a place, y'all more welcome to come over. And but our parents had just come over and got settled, and so we said, well, look, we'll ride it out right now, and we boarded up everything, and our house is built 4 feet above where the base flood elevations were going to be for the preliminary defirms, had those been still in effect. But so I knew we'd be okay flooding wise, or I figured we'd be okay flooding wise. Had no clue the amount of wind damage that was going to be happening around. So we rode it out. The next day we had no power, no water. I had no idea when it was going to be coming back online. So I told my wife, look, let's take our friends up on that offer. And so we got everybody in the car, headed over to Lafayette, and we were there for about a week and a half before we finally got water and power back. And but while we were evacuated, we were there with the 4 boys, and I told my wife, thank God I don't have Wendell's job right now. And it's just I could not imagine. And at that point, I was thinking, man, this is the worst we've ever seen. And I couldn't imagine, like Wendell was painting the picture of what our staff went through during that storm and the aftermath of it, and just I think all the unknowns y'all must have been going through, and having met the guys and seeing them working now, it's really encouraging, inspiring to know the people that we have working on these levees. Like Wendell said, literally every day improving them, even something that would seem as simple as cutting grass. How vital grass growth is to a levee, and the work and the care that they take in maintaining those levees for the people and the businesses around here is really encouraging for the future. But at that point, I was thinking, all right, no, this is not going to be something I'll still be interested in. But then it was at the Association of Levee Boards of Louisiana conference that following December that I ran into Wendell and a couple of the board members, and they said, hey, you still interested? Wendell may be retiring soon. We're just curious if you'd be interested in taking over. And at that point I said, no, absolutely not. And then, but I hadn't seen Wendell yet. And when I saw Wendell, he was like a kid at Christmas explaining how well the system had done, that, we had a little bit of overtopping in places, but the system held. And even the places that we had overtopping in Cloverleaf Farms, and the operator of the farms told Wendell that, look, they had the best harvest they had in years because of the water that came in, and it's like kind of irrigation. So I was kind of encouraged, said, well, I don't know, maybe this will be something to take on. And because the path to get here, like I had mentioned, Wendell had hired me for my first job in government back in 2007, working for Coastal Zone Management for the parish. And then that was under then Parish President Charlotte Randolph, who then promoted me to the department manager job over coastal energy environment, which it included coastal zone management and the solid waste office. And I worked with now Parish President Archie Chasson when he was a project manager with Pisciola and Associates down the bayou. And we worked together with Wendell on a coastal impact assistance program, a federal grant project that we had to dredge out a Catfish Lake in Golden Meadow behind the Oak Ridge Park and build some marsh along the toe of the levee. And that's where Archie and I first got to work together. And like he mentioned in his interview here on the DTV podcast, he said, look, if you ever leave.
Good shout out. Thank you.
Yeah. He said, look, if you ever leave this job, please let me know, because it doesn't look like you do anything all day. And so he definitely followed me. I then in 2011 went over and did the same job, Coastal Restoration Director for Terrebonne Parish government under Michel Claude when he was the parish president there. So I've been able to have the opportunity to work in coastal restoration in both Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes. So being really familiar with both systems, having gotten to work with, then he was Senator Reggie Dupree at the time when Jerome Zerang was director of the Terrebonne Levee District. Then he left the Senate to become the director there, still there now. And so that was a really great opportunity to meet and work with those folks that it's going to be able to translate into some good cooperation moving forward in the future. But after I was there for 4 years in Terrebonne Parish, then went over to the private sector, worked for, it was then CB&I and then became Aptum engineering firm. Some people may remember the old Shaw Group that it was back in the day before Chicago Bridge and Iron bought them out. So I was working, managing projects, handling coastal zone permitting for our clients there. We designed the Grand Bayou floodgate that's now between, the connection between Reaches K and L of Morganza to the Gulf, which is actually in the Lafourche Parish jurisdiction for the South Lafourche Levee District. So after that, the last 3 years, I've been a project manager doing very similar things for Burke Kleinpeter Incorporated out of New Orleans, another engineering firm. They were actually a little South Lafourche connection. Burke Kleinpeter were the engineers on the original Leontario floodgate when it was first designed. So, but there for the last 3 years, I've managed engineering design projects for levees for the Lafourche Basin Levee District and St. Charles Parish, levees, floodgates, flood walls. And most recently, the last year, I've worked as an in-house contractor with BKI at the Corps of Engineers New Orleans District. And people that hear that say, well, look, everything you've learned at the Corps in the last year, please forget it when you come down the bayou. So, but the connections there will be helpful for sure, the relationships there. And I think most importantly, understanding that the Corps of Engineers is definitely a four-letter word in South Lafourche, I think.
I was going to say, they had some adjectives in front of their name.
Oh, absolutely. Every day still do. But one thing that I feel was beneficial for me was realizing, like anywhere else, you have a couple bad apples that really don't don't care, just collecting a paycheck, going home. But for the most part, these guys in the New Orleans district, they live behind levees. They live behind hurricane protection systems. They know how important it is, and they get just as frustrated as we do with how slow they're able to move, and they're hamstring by the authorizations that the systems that they have to work with are imposed by the language of the laws. And so moving forward, it'll be a good understanding to have on behalf of the people of South Lafourche, knowing that we don't have to have enemies at the New Orleans district at the core. They can definitely be our allies. But like Wendell was pointing out, we have taxed ourselves down in South Lafourche to be able to put things on the ground, not waiting for the Corps. And some people would say, well, if you get the Corps of Engineers in here, they'll bring that big checkbook in, but that checkbook comes with a lot of strings attached. You have to build to their standards, which were overkill before Hurricane Katrina happened. Then after the HSDRS system, we call it the Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction System. They love their acronyms of the federal government, but
I call it the New Orleans systems.
The New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
And so when after Katrina, those systems came in play, and those design standards, I mean, it's complete overkill.
But they finally they've been reducing those standards for the right reasons.
Exactly.
And people can now afford. The more you make something, the less you get of it. We need more levees, not less levees. You make it that expensive, you can't have levees, and that's been the conundrum for a lot of the people in South Louisiana.
And so when we say, Wendell's been able to say over the past 40-something years that we can build things faster and cheaper, and it's 100% correct, because even if we get the Corps of Engineers coming in with their checkbook, we're still responsible for a local cost share on whatever they're going to build. So with a levee, it'd typically be 65-35% cost share. So if you look at just the cubic yard, the price per cubic yard of dirt, putting dirt in place, if we can do it for $4-6 a cubic yard to put dirt on the levee, and it's going to cost the Corps of Engineers because of their standards, because of having to truck materials in, because of the extreme limitations they put on contractors. If they're going to be building it for $40-50 a cubic yard, we can get away with building it on our own for cheaper than if we'd be partnering with the Corps of Engineers. And again, faster, easier. What we feel is, to a standard that obviously what we proved in Hurricane Ida will still hold up to not even just a 100-year storm, but Hurricane Ida was more like a 300-year storm.
Oh, it was. It was definitely 300-year.
Yeah. We know that it's, we're not just like some guys at the Corps would say, oh, you're just throwing dirt up. We're not just throwing dirt up. We have very good engineers that guide our decision.
And some of us say that dirt's better than air.
I got to say this. When I was in my last week at the Corps of Engineers, before I came over here, I talking to Colonel Jones. His kids and my kids are both in Cub Scouts in different areas. And so we're talking about Pinewood Derby results. And I told him, well, look, this is my last week here. I'm going to be leaving and heading to South Lafourche Levee District. I said, I don't know if you've had the pleasure of meeting Wendell Curall yet. He said, yes, elevation is a salvation to our inundation. I said, oh, great, you've met him. So
well, we were talking about a thing, but Reggie Dupree, I want to go back to Reggie. Reggie became a senator. And, he grew up in Pointe-à-Cher. I grew up in Cutoff. And, when we go in the outside world, because of the way we talk, we got to prepare better than anybody else because they think we're dumb right off the bat. So we got to really know our stuff. But we kind of worked together and I had a lot of experience with levees. And Reggie did, the senators, other senators like Blanco trusted him. And Reggie played a key part after Katrina. It could have gone a lot of different ways, but because Reggie was there, used good common sense, we had a lot of conversations, and then we were able to pass some laws to help us move forward. We had some rehabilitation laws that allowed us to do more of our own work, which we could do quicker and cheaper. But I can't say enough. And Reggie had a bad illness right during that time. Had he not survived that illness, I don't know how Louisiana would look. He's the one who put CPRA together. He put a number of other bills together and some critical bills for us in South Lafourche. The way we build is based on some of the things that Reggie did, environmentally and on flood protection side.
Nick, you outlined how you spent a lot of your professional career working on coastal issues in both Lafourche and Terrebonne, and then kind of at large in the private sector. Wendell, you've seen the coast kind of huge land masses disappear over the 4+ decades you've been working at the Levee District. We all know, I think most people know how coastal erosion affects us as a whole, especially as it comes to hurricanes. But how does coastal erosion specifically affect the levee itself?
Well, now the Gulf of Mexico is against the levee. Okay, when I was a kid, I remember 6 years old, going to Grand Isle, pass on the old Levee Bridge, and you look toward Grand Isle, and you saw 80% marsh and treed ridges. When I was working on the levee, I would see, I call it the Great Flattening. In the late 80s, all of a sudden, I'm seeing almost things in Terrebonne. And that wasn't like that. When I used to drive to Grand Isle, you used to look back toward the Levee Bridge and you wouldn't be able to see it. Now you can see the Levee Bridge all the way to Grand Isle. And that's just in everything's going down. So anything you put between the Gulf of Mexico and where you live helps knock down storm surge.
Back in 2005, I wanted to point that out. We had back when I was on the radio on the Raging Cajun, we actually did a Marsh Madness, we called it.
Marsh Madness,
and
exactly.
I remember that episode specifically because we talked to you, and at one point we were in what seemed like an open body of water, like the ocean. I couldn't see land on either side. And I asked you, what body of water is this? You said, this is Bayou Pero. I'm like, a bayou? This looks like an ocean. You could not see land on either side.
And we had a gentleman there who had a house and a camp on Bayou Pero when it was the width of Bayou Lafourche.
That's
that's just really amazing. You go back to the old maps, and I worked with Nick, and I asked him to put together pre-Katrina, Earthshot, and post-Katrina. And people need to look at it. It's devastating. We've worked in environmental protection, and we've always tried to build marshes. Even Bob was a Sea Grant agent before and, dealt with alligators. And, the more marsh you have, the more fish, the more everything you have. Well, that storm, we did the BA2, one of the first environmental projects on the east side. And it worked real well near Clovelly all the way to the Breton Canal. That storm took that out, and it took out other marsh that we had done restoration on, and marsh that was just there. We've lost 100 square miles of marsh, and a lot of it is on the sides of the levee. It's remarkably bad. Again, the Gulf is now at the edge of the levee.
And for levee protection itself, obviously, it's a devastation to the environment, to the fisheries, especially the fisheries that use the shorelines as spawning and breeding ground. They've lost that habitat, and so it'll have a negative impact for our fisheries for a long time. For hurricane protection, like Wendell said, anything you can put between the Gulf and your levee is going to be helpful. But when you look at erosion, we're all painfully aware of coastal erosion and the effect that it has. When you have no more wetlands between you and the levee, it's your levee that's getting eroded. And so we've ridden the levee, Wendell and I, in the last week and a half since I've been here, and there are some pretty alarming spots where there's nothing. There's no more marsh apron, and that you have well over 300, 400 feet in the better cases before you start to get any kind of land. And so the more open water you have between the land and your levee, that wave action starts. And this is not even just during storm times. This is regular wave action on when you get a south wind, southeast wind. It kicks up the waves, and those waves just start to get really violent against the toe of the levee.
So guys, and I was going to ask Wendell for his elevation quote right here, but other than building up, what are future plans with regard to the levee system in general, and how does Morganza to the Gulf tie into all of this?
Well, South Lafourche system is kind of the anchor to Morganza to the Gulf. They started building the southern ports and connecting the bottom ports of the bayous in Terrebonne, and then they came across from Grand Bayou, and the Grand Bayou structure attached to the we call it the Paul Dufresne Forum, and that levee connects to our levee, and then they use our levee from that area on the west side of the bayou, all the way to LA 24. You go across to the floodgate. You go to the other side where we have the wall on the east side of Bayou Lafourche. And then we turn to the south, but somewhere on that side, they're going to build a floodgate and then a coastal canal. And wherever that is built, then that'll connect to our levee near the Delta Farms Road. And that's what Morganza is going to do. And then it's going to continue in the future north and tie into some levees behind Lockport. And, for years, I've always talked about a comprehensive hurricane protection for southeast Louisiana. And we're really not getting that far away from it. Now the St. Mary's has been bolstering their flood protection. You got Morganza connecting a big part of that. They connect to our system. And if we can get from the Lafourche Ridge to the West Jefferson system or the Davis Pond levees, you basically have the majority of that part of the Louisiana having most of the population behind some hurricane protection. And then they're building the West Shore project for the Laplace, the west side of Lake Pontchartrain. Well, we expect to see a little bit more work in the north side. So you get the Pontchartrain Basin all the way to Morgan City. That's protecting a lot of our industry and a lot of people. Now, there are problems in southwest Louisiana. They have never been that interested in doing flood protection. They are talking about it now. Now we're looking at trying to help them also to extend some protection all the way to the Texas line.
And so, like I was saying, the as far as plans other than elevating, are there any other plans for the future as far as the maintenance of the levee? Does the levee grow other than what Wendell's talking about here?
I think right now getting a consistent elevation is the top priority. Wendell, you can help me out with the original core recommended elevations.
The design was 13 feet on the south end and 8.5 on the north end. And then after Katrina, they made a new 100-year storm, but they never did the study in our system, because they said they weren't going to handle it, right. And they did the New Orleans levees, okay? So I went and I got on the computer, and I punched in highest hurricane flood surges in the Gulf of Mexico, and a list came out. And then highest hurricane surges in Louisiana. And so I used those two lists. And on the Louisiana list, the highest was 17.5 near Slidell for Hurricane Katrina. For the Gulf of Mexico, you had the 28 feet for Katrina. And those poor people in Waveland got Camille. That was 28 feet. Camille, 24 feet. And then you had a number of those storms were just between that and 17 feet. But I looked at our income. I looked at our right-of-ways. And I told them, well, let's try to get 16 on the south end and 13 on the north. And as we've been doing projects, when we see that we can build a little more or we can economize and get more dirt up, we've been building some places to 18. And we needed every inch of levee when Ida hit. And what we're doing, we've pretty much got to that. That was after, that's 2006, right? We went from 13 to 8.5, and now we're almost consistent, 16 with some 18s, all the way to 13 on the north side. So as Nick was saying, we've got to try to maintain that elevation because we still got subsidence issues going on, and we want to change the Rose floodgate, the Ted Gisclair floodgate, into a lock. That's one of the main changes. Also, we're trying to get more control of the water in the bayou because when we close the floodgates, it rains, the bayou level goes up. Now, we don't want people to flood by water going over the road, and we're looking at trying to pull that water back to the pumps. But at the same time, we don't want people to be flooding in the back because we got all the water coming from the bayou. So It's always some tough decisions, and it's never the perfect solution. It's always what's the best we can do to help the most amount of people. And every time we do that, some people are a little upset because things don't work out their way, but I guarantee we worry about everybody. And we don't quit until we've tried to help everybody that has a problem when it comes to the rainfall issues, tidal issues, and even if the Mississippi River flooded, our system could help us keep some of that flood water out.
Well, guys, we certainly appreciate you joining us here on the podcast to talk about the history and the future of the South Lafourche Levee District. And we started the show by getting a little personal with y'all, and so I want to end the episode the same way. like a music background a prerequisite for this job? Because that's something else
You
that y'all
ready?
share
You
in
ready?
common.
You ready? Bye, bye, Miss American Pie.
Yon there.
Drove my Chevy to the levee.
That's not on his playlist.
In my interview with the board members, they said, look, we thought we were getting rid of one musician, and now we know we got another musician coming in.
No, they were all getting rid of one musician. They found out I wasn't.
But do you also hand over the keys to the Hurricane Levee band, or is that strictly yours? Or?
No, that band has always been wide open. We always had people sitting in. No, that's what makes it fun.
Unless you're missing a couple members, then it's the Tropical Storm Levee band.
That's right. No, when we do the three of us that do the harmony and just the guitars, that's a Tropical Storm Levee band.
So that brings me to my final question, which is more like I'm putting it to you, Wendell. You got to drop a couple of your best jokes on us because.
Well, there is no best jokes. All of them are bad. I made a deal with God.
The best
God
and
said,
worst.
He says, Wendell, I can give you a handful of tremendous jokes that everybody's going to laugh when you tell them, or I can give you a ton of jokes that no one's going to laugh at. I've read a ton of jokes.
He went for quantity over quality.
That's right.
No question.
That's right. So, but the little sayings, I watch smart people like Benjamin Franklin, and he do these little quips, and you remember them. A stitch in time saves nine. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and so I'm saying, hey, those work. So things just kind of happen. And I watch Johnny Carson. So the combination of those two, you end up playing with words. I'm such a boring speaker that to amuse myself, I make up these word jokes.
Well, I tell you.
They're called puns, okay? And you know why it's called puns? It's punishment.
Look, it takes people that don't do a lot of public speaking don't understand how much courage it takes to drop a joke in general, especially when you're expecting people to laugh. So I think you've got the strategy. If you tell a joke assuming no one's going to laugh and you get a couple of chuckles, I mean, that's a win.
Look, I do a little bus tour, and I'm up there telling really bad jokes, and then take a little break, and I sit down, and this lady says, well, Wendell, I like your jokes. I said, well, thank you, that's nice, but I really don't care. I do that to amuse myself. The groans are just as good as the laugh.
He was trying to get better this morning. That we were talking about a retention area that we're working on in Southern Golden Meadow, and he said, but look, that idea just doesn't hold water. And I said, you couldn't help yourself. He said, actually, I tried to stop myself. I tried.
But it was a fluid situation.
See, this is what I know Nick's a huge fan of dad jokes, so that goes right.
Well, that was the other question they
jokes.
asked in the interview. They said, well, how are your jokes? I said, well, if you ask my 13-year-old, they're terrible. If you ask my 10-year-old, I'm a genius.
But look, we don't our job, right? We got a lot of cattle pastures, all right? We don't do our jobs. The cattle pastures flood. That's when you have an utter disaster. I've been milking that one for a long time.
On that note, I can think of no better segue into our rapid fire round. All right, guys. So if you don't know the drill yet, these are rapid fire questions. You're not meant to answer quickly. We want to find out what's the first thing that comes to mind when we bring these things up. So feel free to explain if you need to. So, like I said, we have a whole new list. Some of our favorites from the last season, but a couple of new ones. So here we go. The first one is, if you could have one final meal cooked by your parents, grandparents, whoever, what would it be?
Roasted duck.
Now, who would have cooked that?
Well, that's my grandma, Grandma
Roasted
Golden
duck.
Yeah.
Man, just I think a good slow-cooked beef roast overnight in the crock pot with some rice and corn.
I was about to say, Nick was definitely a rice and gravy guy growing up. So that makes sense.
But also jambalaya. My grandma made the number 10 jambalaya. Always.
Okay, so on that note, in the past, we've asked, potato salad, if it goes in the gumbo or on the side. So this season, we have a new question. White beans, do they go on top of the jambalaya or on the side?
You go ahead. I'm not going to have a popular answer.
I'm a versatile guy. I'll have them both ways.
However you get them, as long as you've eaten them, it doesn't matter.
I love that.
I'm the exact same way. It doesn't matter to me either way. I kind of take the gumbo potato salad approach. I have the best of both worlds. I don't just throw the potato salad in the gumbo. I take a bite of each together. So it's kind of like that with the
It's hard
the
to answer for
jambalaya
me because I'm like the Will Rogers of meals. I never met a meal I didn't like.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm probably going to be called on to turn in my Cajun card because I don't eat white beans.
Oh.
And I don't eat potato salad. So it's not a question. I just eat my jambalaya, eat my gumbo, and I'm happy.
Well, as long as you eat those two things, I think we're all right. I think the others are just, go along with it. So we're not pulling your Cajun card just yet. Favorite snowball flavor?
Half grape, half spearmint. And that's because of Elaine's snowballs. When we were kids, she had the little characters that she would name her combinations after, and that was the Barney snowball, and I got it one day as a joke, and I have never looked back. It was such a delicious flavor combination.
I have to interject here because a lot of people, we found out their favorite flavor was the coconut.
Yeah.
And it's not because it was their favorite flavor, it's just because that's the flavor their parents would actually let them have. Right. So shout out to our parents for not being scared. Actual flavor in our snowballs other than coconut. Wendell?
Strawberry, but my grandfather had a snowball stand the Sacred Heart Church he cut off, so everybody knew about the snowball stand back there. And all of the grandkids, we had 20-something grandkids. You got only one snowball a day, but you got a free one.
All right. This is serious business now. Jar roux. Sometimes or never?
No, never.
Roux
from a jar.
Roux out of a jar.
No, I've never eaten. No. It's
Wendell didn't even know they made that.
That you know of. Not that you know of.
But when I cook, I tell you, I started cooking because people weren't cooking what I grew up with, And so I started cooking roux and doing gumbos. And I know the roux done when it smells like my grandma's house. No, I'm serious. I say, okay, it's there. It's there.
I used to run in the town of Lockport, and especially on a weekend morning, you could tell who was cooking gumbo by the smell of the roux coming from the house. All right, final question. You're at a down the bayou wedding reception. What song do you absolutely expect to hear?
Look, back in the late 50s and 60s, Matilda. I mean, if you did, you weren't officially married
until... I don't know if that's not true today.
No, but it's not. You weren't officially married until they played Matilda at the reception.
Yep.
It depends on the generation, I guess, but Tina Na for sure. No question. You got to have Tina Na.
However inappropriate for a wedding reception, it absolutely.
I'm in love with a married woman. Yeah.
But when I was in when I was late teens, Color My World. Everybody played Color My World at that.
All right, guys. Well, again, Wendell Curall, the outgoing general manager of the South Lafourche Levee District, Nick Mathern, the new general manager of the South Lafourche Levee District. Guys, thank you so much for joining us and giving us all a kind of a look behind the curtain, as it may be, to how this thing had came to be and where we're going in the future. Thank you so much.
I always enjoy working with you.
Always.
That's more exciting when there's hurricanes, but always could depend on you to do the right thing. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Wendell. Appreciate it.
And I was glad to put up with you for a little while longer.
No question. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the DTB podcast. Thanks to our producer, Ross Jeanbaugh, our executive producers, Jure Gyro, Hillary Crum, and the other Bless Your Heart board members, Luke Newman and Chris Brantley. Please visit blessyourheartnonprofit.com to donate and learn more about our organization. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the DTB podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also get more content by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at the DTB podcast. I'm Brendan Mathern. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.